Oops. All right, part two. So, like I said, Tom was in a small town named Newfoundland, PA. One day we were talking about the town and everything. He said, well, it's a really historic town. He said, it's just a shame they let everything go the way it did. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, Teddy Roosevelt and a bunch of other dignitaries, I forget all the names he said, they used to come to Newfoundland Hotel and stay there and hunt and fish the area because the area was rich with deer and bear. And the fishing in this west branch of the Paulpack Creek that I was mentioning, the Lackawaxen and the Delaware were close. So they used to stay there and they used to fish and hunt all over the area. Now, being he's an old man, or was an old man at the time, I was like, I kind of researched it, and he did. He actually used to stay here in PA and hunt and fish the area. And the hotel caught on fire back in the 70s and burned to the ground and was never restored, which is a shame. It's a piece of history lost. And unfortunately, most of these guys I'm talking about are going to be pieces of history lost. So Tom lived for quite a while in Philadelphia, his writing for the Field and Stream and different journals, writing his memoirs, his books and stuff. And then he moved up here to Newfoundland. His wife's name was Betsy, and she was this adorable little, like, 4 foot nothing tall lady. Great people, they really were. So, Tom had, you'd go into Tom's shop, but he always had this medallion on. One day I asked him about it, and he said to me they lived for a couple of years with the Indians out on the Delaware. So, oh, okay. And he was an honorary, he actually had the paperwork. He was an honorary Delaware, Lenni Lenape, whichever you want to call him, Indian. He actually had the paperwork where he was adopted into the tribe and whatnot. And oddly enough, he was a World War II veteran, and he had been missing some medals from World War II that he received. And the gentleman I was talking about earlier, Garth, he helped him through the DOD to get his medals finally from World War II. There was a big write up in the local paper about it. But yeah, what a character. I mean, we moved from um, a little shop in Newfoundland. We had the Future Fisherman's program had to leave. So we found another gentleman, and he had what used to be a hunting and fishing camp on the west branch of the Paulpack that he let Tom use, the basement of. Yeah, I'll tell you, man, when you walked into this house, the front doors were big French front doors. There was literally a creek that ran through the middle of the house. They rerouted a part of the creek from outside through the house with a water wheel, and it was about 2 foot deep. And since it was a flowing creek, the trout would actually live in this little trough that went through the house. It had a water wheel in it. It was an amazing place. Then you went up the second story. The second story was built out of 8x8 timbers, floor and everything. There was a small kitchen and living area, like a studio, down to one side, and the other side was a wide open, like, dance floor that they used to hold dances in there for the customers. And the upstairs was the third floor, more attic space and rooms. But the downstairs was just, I mean, there was dumbwaiters in there. There was that water wheel with the creek that ran through the middle of the house. There was stone walls. There was like outdoor areas to sit, screened in porch where you looked over the creek. What an amazing place. A gentleman's name was Lauren. And not too long, Tom couldn't do it anymore, and it kind of broke up. And I got a hold of Lauren finally, and Lauren told me the house had burned down. Fire started right by the program room and destroyed literally everything in the room and half the house. Which is a shame, boy, because that was something to behold, that house. So yeah, you'd go out to this fishing shop and you'd hear stories like one day he was telling me he stopped to go fishing. In this creek, he said you could literally straddle the creek and fish it. Now, I knew about these little creeks from my dad because my dad was the same way. He'd stop and if there was a trickle of water, he'd try fishing it. I used to think he was nuts until one day he pulled out a 16-inch trout out of a piece of water that, I wouldn't say it would hold minnows. But he was telling us that he was out and he was straddling this creek and he was dappling a fly. Now, for those of you who don't know what dappling is, you put a fly on the end of a long pole. It doesn't have to be a fly rod, any pole, but a string. And this can be used to this day, so just remember this part. You'd put the fly on there, you'd reach out over the creek through the brush, and you tap the fly on the top of the water. Now, trout are used to that because when mayflies hatch, they bounce across the top of the water a little bit. So they come up and smack it. So he had a really nice brook trout on the wall. And that's where that trout came from. He was out in this creek that he could barely straddle. And dappling a fly through the brush along the shoreline. And he caught this like 20 or 21 inch brook trout out of nowhere. So, he'd always come up with stories like that telling you, he was always friendly to people when they came in, even though he was a fairly miserable man. But, he was always willing to lend his opinions, willing to lend his knowledge to anybody who wanted to learn. Whether it be hunting or fishing, because this man could tell you what weather to hunt squirrels in, where to hunt them, rabbits the same way. Same with my dad. My dad would be able to do that, but Tom would tell you, okay, the wind's blowing from this direction. You want to walk this way to hunt the rabbits because they always sit back first into the weather. So if you walk this direction, you'll catch them facing you or running away from you. He was the first guy to turn me on to muddy creeks. We were sitting there talking one day, and he said to me, well, the best time to catch big trout is right after it rains and the creeks are muddy. I'm like, what are you, nuts? Trout don't bite in a muddy creek. I was wrong. I went out one day right after it rained, and you could barely see in the water. I tossed a worm in, called boom, 20-inch. About 10 minutes later, fishing on the bottom. Kaboom, 22-inch. Caught another 20-inch after that. So muddy creeks are my favorite. And then he explained to me why. He said, because the mud flows on a certain level in the creek. The fish notice they go down below the mud level. The bottom of the creek is generally clear. You can see. He said the big fish that can see you walking along the shoreline, fish have an angle that they can see out of that water. In a good creek, they could see 10 feet on the outside of the bank. That was another lesson he taught me. Never fish trout in the water. Always fish trout from at least 10 feet off the bank, or, like the one guy told me before, walk against the current, not with the current. And make sure you can toss way above. Like if you see a trout rising, here at point A, don't throw there. Throw up here. Because that fish comes back, hits the fly, and goes right back up. Always throw 3-4 feet ahead of the rise. works. Unbelievable. But yeah, like I said, he was full of knowledge, and he would always tell you about stuff like this. And even hunting. He used to tell me all the time, don't go hunting in this man-made garbage that has all kind of scents and smells, and you got to smell like the animal you're hunting. And they used to keep the back of a doe and buck haunch. There's a scent gland right down by the bottom knuckle by the hoof. And his mom, his mom, but him and his dad and his uncles and them used to keep this haunch in a box. And it was time to go deer hunting, they'd put their clothes in there so that they would smell like a deer, rather than smelling like humans. Used to tell me all the time, descent yourself with pine smoke, wear wool, because wool will pick up the scent of the woods and mask your scent. And they used to put their wool clothing in this haunch in a box so that when they went out, they smelled like a deer scent. The wool clothing would hold it and obviously keep them warm. So, like I said, full of stories, full of knowledge that he was always willing to give out. And he got talking about when I was one day, he told me, he said, well, you people are just plain stupid. So what do you mean? So you go out there with these little 2 and 3 inch knives that really won't do you much good. He said, or I see a lot of guys hunting with these 10, 12 inch knives that are not good for anything but butchering. He said, but a deer is a deer and a bison's a bison. And if you're carrying a 12-inch blade, you're looking to either, cut up grizzly bear or bison. He said, so you people are just plain stupid. It was Thom. And then, we talked about different camps and camping, and we'll continue that on part 3. You guys have a good one. We'll be right back.